So this one has been a long time in coming. You wouldn't even believe the number of requests I've had to do this, and they've only amplified with that recent video where I criticized the toy-accurate version. So I think it's finally time to give in and just do it. Not that I was resisting before. You'd be amazed how making 3 videos a week just isn't anywhere near enough to talk about all the things I want to talk about. Sometimes something has to give, and sometimes it has to give for like a year and a half. So, if any of you have questions like, hey, do you think you're ever going to do a sequel to this or that video? The answer is, yes, I probably do plan to do that. But the schedule of what I want to make often collides with reality. Like, I've been planning on making a Fixing Earthrise video for well over a year at this point. The folder has been sitting on my desktop this entire time. God, I need to get on that. Anyways, I'm trying to hit 10k subscribers by the channel's 2nd birthday in exactly 2 months. If you enjoyed this video by the end, please consider subscribing. And the liking and commenting thing really helps too. It's Siege Springer. This is a figure I was hyping on so very hard before it ever came out, and that could be what led to my eventual disappointment with it. I mean, I was just salivating over this thing's perfection, because it's been a goal of mine since basically getting back into collecting to have a complete 86 cast on my shelves at some point. And this looked so perfect, and it still does look so good, so much like it needed to. I mean, maybe it's a little squarer and more svelte than the model from the movie, but I like squares. They're cool. So I'm down for that when it looks accurate enough and it only makes the figure look more awesome. But the look only takes this thing so far because this figure has problems. Basically, all of them stem from the build in the QC. I find these arm struts very uncooperative a lot of the time. They are easy to pop out unless you are trying, at which point they become impossible to remove. And they are very hard to pop back in. All of the blame for that rests at the non-existent feet of these panels. I don't even know what these do. It's like they were designed just to fuck with me. Like, the arms peg into them, but the arms also peg into the back. So why is this redundant piece here if it's already securing back there? The obvious argument being that double securing can only be a good thing, right? No, not here. This agonizing piece of crap pops out of alignment half the time you try to peg it in, and off entirely the other half. Why wasn't this piece of shit part pinned? I swear every time I try to transform this thing, I have to put this back on like 3 times each because they are held together by the magnetic power of friendship between the 2 parts while actually being enemies with the shoulder piece. And then I finally fix the knees. Every copy of this thing I have ever heard of is weak at the knees like a blonde running from the slasher in a horror movie. Like, this figure's feet would stay planted as his entire body fell over because the hinges were so inconceivably loose. I've loaded them down with some tightener, and now they are probably too tight, but I will take this with a smile on my face when compared to the normal version. I probably should have done this to the ankles as well, since he constantly leans back due to them being pretty much exactly the same in their ability to support this thing. But once we get past those issues, I can say I wouldn't really choose to change how it looks. I mean, it would be nice if the backpack could compress down just a little bit more, but it's okay like this, just perhaps a bit strange. The back was much cleaner on the animation model. But let's be real here. Springer's original design wasn't exactly the best with the weird cocked sideways shoulder pauldrons, way too round physique, and creepy baby bib hanging off of his collar. Here, the bib turns into his chest, so instead it comes off strong rather than like a pervert. The proper full-scale pauldrons on this also look way better, giving him a more heavily armored vibe. And then look at him, he's just so square! Buck's good, Bucks contain everything I've ever loved. What has round ever done for me? You know me, I'm one of those psychopaths who actually likes the siege battle damage, and I think Springer here had some of the best of it. I can admit that sometimes the damage didn't look like much of anything, but here with its focus on highlighting the edges and the sharp silver, it looks like natural wear on his parts. And it can kind of fade into the back of your mind, on his shins especially. If you focus on it, you know it's supposed to be damage, but if you let your mind wander, it just looks like panel lining. It's amazing how much this figure kind of overwrites the original design in my head. Like, it's close enough for me to think it's perfectly accurate, and then it's just cool enough that my brain wants to recognize this as the correct version. I have to compare the two side by side to hammer home that they are really not the same design. Human memory sucks. This is why robots are so much cooler. What's not cool is his thighs. This man's is skipping leg day enough to completely atrophy, and boy does he have some childbirthing hips. The head, I can gladly say, is fantastic though. The colors are a little too bright on it, as is basically the entire figure. His forehead crest seems to have been really simplified when compared to screenshots from the movie. Then again, what the hell is wrong with his head in this picture? Oh my god. There is off-model, and then there is Springer, having a tiny beam for a head with a knife blade sticking out of the top of it like his brain is trying to carve its way out through his skull, wrapped in a Burger King crown. I'll take the tiny crest if that's the alternative, thank you very much. The only real problem I have with the head is that the yellow paint in his cheek vents is a little thin, washed out, and lifeless. Pretty much otherwise, this is the most accurate part of the figure, looking nearly perfect. The face sculpt especially really captures the character. And I suppose that's what you can say about this robot mode. It may not look exactly like him, but it captures the character so much it might be more G1 accurate than G1. It's kind of a crime that this didn't show up in any part of the WFC show, but then again, some might call that mercy. I'd call that mercy. I'd probably like this even less if it was in the show, like I do with Siege Prime. Such a good figure, so undermined by it being used for such an awful character. Accessories on this guy are almost good. I mean, he comes with a lot. He's got 2 swords. These have specialized pegs for specific blast effects. Unfortunately, the figure doesn't have anything even approaching sword-wielding wrists, so he can't look good in almost any poses with these. And these absolutely boil my blood, because they're supposed to peg onto the backpack, but they grip with all the strength of Hawkeye trying to hold Black Widow's hand over a cliff. I know he tried really hard in that. She still fell. The point is, these pop off all the time, and I honestly get kind of irrationally annoyed about it. It's just so frustrating that they didn't think of a better way to do this. Then he comes with two guns. These are relatively generic and unremarkable. Then it comes with this piece of the helicopter rotors, which isn't much of anything on its own. It spins incredibly well, but it doesn't really help this figure out much when there's just nothing to do with this thing in the other modes, except you can kind of combine all of his accessories into this floppy super cannon that can't hold on target to save its wielder's life. Though it would make an interesting version of Russian roulette. And once again, the swords can't hold to this either. So the accessories are kind of disappointing. They're all very generic and bland. The fact that the rotor does nothing in the other modes is a bit depressing, and the swords both not being very useful with a character who doesn't have the wrists to utilize them, plus their complete inability to peg and hold on, is remarkably frustrating. I would love to stick them in a drawer and forget about them, but they are integral to the alt mode, so fuck me, I guess, I can't do that. Poseability is decent. Head has what feels like less than average range. Shoulders are very cleverly designed. Unfortunately, that doesn't do them a lot of good. They can get out less than a 90, and if you are going back, it's even worse. Elbows get a bit better than a 90, wrist swivel, completely unimpeded hips, seriously more than 90 knees, and if you do fix them, you can fake a maximum. They're too loose to hold if you do that otherwise. And feet with what I guess is a maximum rocker, and a maximum toe down. That maximum so hard it becomes a toe up. So it's conflicting here. The upper body is definitely lacking, but from the waist down, the lower body is excellent. Though only if you tighten the joints, because if not, sure the articulation is there, but it's not going to hold well enough for you to do anything with it. It feels worse than it probably is because of the build holding it back, but it's not great. Transformation into car mode is the better of the two, and it's still not what I would call fun. This one doesn't do as much as you'd think. You basically just bend his knees and make him shrug real hard. Getting the shoulders in place can be really aggravating like with the normal mode, but when they snap in, it is remarkably satisfying. I always forget to flip out the shin wings. And the car mode is pretty good. It's weirdly inverted when compared to the animation model though. Did you notice that? How the engine in the show stood over the wheel wells, but here it's the exact opposite? It's not a problem, I even think it looks cooler this way. It's just something I'm noticing. The problem with this thing is that it doesn't hold together much at all in the back section. You'll get it all tabbed in perfectly, and then near any pressure will cause it to entirely flay apart. And the damn thing can't roll even a little because it's bananaed out so the front wheels are lower than the rear ones, which you'd think couldn't be a problem since it has to rest on both pairs, right? But no, you're forgetting the fact that Springer is apparently from Texas because he's got a huge belt buckle that he's now riding on in this mode. You can see just how pronounced it is when I push down on the front of the alt mode, so trying to roll this will just scratch the shit out of that part, and he still won't go anywhere. Transformation into helicopter mode is actually what I would qualify as being horrible despite being relatively clever and interesting. For starters, I basically can't ever transform the tail section without pinching the shit out of my hands. And you kind of have to undo the entire transformation, even though the two modes are very similar, you just can't switch between the two of them. You basically have to untransform it and then retransform it. Getting the arm panels out is a bitch and a half, and I always try to rotate them the wrong way once they are. I can never remember if you were supposed to rotate the legs at the thigh or the hip, and I only just figured out how to do the whole process correctly for the first time a few weeks ago, because I never realized there was a tab that you have to snake apart past so it can lock in properly, so the hinges that the feet are mounted to stops trying to flex the arm out of the way because they're resting in these slots in the arms I didn't know were there until last month. And once again, these stupid fucking panels get in the way because they're blocking your view of the part that you have to squeeze past. It's actually easier to pull them off altogether so you can see what you're doing, then put them back on after you're done. It's not even worth mentioning the parts forming, the entire thing is so bad. But you end up with this pretty good looking, though fairly poor approximation of his alt mode. The fact of the matter is that it's the wrong shape and the entire back half is the wrong color. Once again, it looks cool, and I happen to like this more than the animation model, but if you're looking for something that jumped off the screen, you are out of luck because almost every detail is wrong. I think it would have been cool if they'd given him the square rotors he had on the original, that way he could have had executioner's swords. I have to point out that this rolls better than the actual car, and these rotors spin like no joke. So this is better than the car, though less accurate, and the transformation to get to it is the absolute antithesis of fun. So this is why this figure is a serious mixed bag for me, and I think the bad might outweigh the positives. It looks good in robot mode and it poses well, but it also simultaneously sucks at the posing because the build is so bad in some areas. It's got two cool alt modes, but one can't roll, and they both have bad transformations, with one being too easy and the other being too frustrating. And while all of its modes look cool, none of them look truly accurate, which may not matter to you, but if you're looking for the definitive version of the movie character, then this is still worth mentioning. Though, I do think it's close enough for the most part. I can see why others would like this more than me, especially if they didn't find the transformations to be so unenjoyable. Me, I'd rather take a hard kick to the shins rather than transform this into helicopter mode, and I'm someone who says the Deformation Space Starscream isn't anywhere near as bad as people claim on the transformation front. Ultimately, I'm comfortable saying that this is an okay figure with real drawbacks, which puts it among the worst of Siege because the whole line was operating from like a 7 to a 9 out of 10. Getting a 5 or a 6 is by default extremely low considering its competition. I don't hate it, but I really wanted to love it more than I do. And that's not half what I have to say, but it's enough what I have to say. And I know, you know, what everyone else tells you to do at the end of these videos. So, if you liked what you saw here, please do that. And if you'd like to take it a step further, then please, share this video with any friend you think may be interested. I hope you all enjoyed listening to me waste your time.